Jules, let's enter the alternative parallel universe inhabited by Dale Johnson.
Yes.
What if VAR had existed all along? How would the course of football history have been changed? Because time is fluid, as we all know, from watching Back to the Future. So I take you back to the 2003-04 season, Manchester United playing Porto, Jose Mourinho's Porto. We all know what happened. Porto advanced. Mourinho goes on to win the treble. He goes on to get the job at Chelsea and changes Premier League history. But there were several controversial incidents in that game.
That's right.
Tim Howard spilling the ball, but we won't go there. We don't want to upset Tim. But the Paul Scholes offside. Yeah. And let's bring in Dale here. That goal doesn't get scored. Manchester United advance. Was it that obvious an offside? Would VAR have caught it?
Yeah, it was absolutely clearly onside. It was just after half-time. Manchester United were already one goal up when it was John O'Shea who knocked the ball on to Scholes, who turned and scored from close range. And the linesman put his flag up. And, of course, back in those days, there was no VAR to come in and draw the lines and show that Scholes was, in fact, onside and award the goal. And that would have been 2-0 up to Manchester United. And, of course, with Alex Ferguson's team at Old Trafford and in such an ascendancy, then you've got to fancy that they would go on to go through. And it was only that injury time goal, like you say, after Tim Howard spilled the ball, which resulted in Porto going through to the next round on away goals and going to win the tournament. Of course, we also had that image of Mourinho running down the touchline, celebrating with an arm of the loft, which became a really iconic moment in Champions League history, and essentially started this whole process of Mourinho becoming the figure that he was, and essentially was part of the building blocks and ended up at Chelsea.
Okay, I'm going to put on my Duncan Castles Mourinho hat right now to remind you all that Mourinho had won the Europa League the year before, that he would go on to do double with Porto. He says he'd already been contacted by Roman Abramovich to replace Claudio Ranieri. I don't believe that. But the reality was, we know for a fact there'd been links with Liverpool, there'd been links with Spurs. I think there's a fair chance he would have ended up.
It was on the radar of a lot of teams.
And I think even if he'd been knocked out in those circumstances, it's fair to say, Jules, he would have still been in the Premier League the following season. He might not have won as much because winning at Spurs back then was more difficult than winning at Chelsea.
Maybe. But I think he would have still ended up. He was one of the brightest young managers. But that game was still a very defining moment in his career, because after that, they just blitzed through the Champions League, beat Monaco in the final to win it.
Dale, are you on board with that? That ultimately Mourinho would have still been Mourinho. He just maybe wouldn't have won as much and been so dominant so early.
Yeah, I think it was basically an accelerant, wasn't it, for him? It was particularly, like you said, he won the Europa League just before the UEFA Cup, but it wasn't a case that anyone really outside of the hipster football circles really knew who Mourinho was as a manager of Porto. He was just a sort of a name that people would have known. He wasn't seen as this next big name in coaching. But after he won that game at Old Trafford, after he won the Champions League, then everyone sort of take notice. And like you said, there was no doubt that he was going to go on and have a successful career. It might not have happened as quickly as it did.
People who listen to the show I co-hosted on TalkSport back in 2003, when we had Mourinho on for about 45 minutes, would know who he was. Okay. But you're right, Dale. It would have been, I think, undoubtedly a slower ascent.